Can you please look up this site?
See if we can figure out something.
Okay, I'm going to give a couple of seconds for everyone to join. While I quickly do this, turn off the live reaction. YouTube's frozen. I'm going to do this. Give me a second to turn off the live reaction. Sorry. Off and this on. And save. Portal didn't work. Oh, for goodness sake. That's weird. This is the third or fourth time it's not worked. Okay, so then we just need to give everyone a couple of seconds to get here. Would have lost some people along the way. Let me see. Oh, I wasn't still on my phone. Because I was just going to share. And I can't see the replay, the chat replay yet. Also, if you want a very random rabbit hole. Yeah, look, no one's coming across. Okay, I'm going to start so long. Random rabbit hole, ballerina farms. We're starting with the voir dire of the ex-girlfriend. I need to actually contact YouTube support and be like, why do you keep breaking my portals? This is frustrating. I lose people every time.
Present counsel, please.
Please be seated. Your session, please be seated.
Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes, please.
Good morning, everyone. The matter before the court is Commonwealth versus Christine Ricci. Ms. Ricci is present. Counsel, please state your name for the record. We can start with the Commonwealth.
Good morning, Your Honor. Jeremy Cusman for the Commonwealth. Good morning.
Shannon Buckingham for the Commonwealth.
Jason Ron for the Commonwealth. Good morning.
Good morning.
Joshua Wood for Christine Ritchie.
Good morning, Your Honor. Maura Berry for Ms. Ritchie. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning to all the lawyers and good morning to the defendant. So do we have Ms. Freeman ready to go?
We do, Your Honor.
You can bring her in.
Thank you.
Just go right to that officer right there.
Can one of the mods just get her name and spelling for me, please?
Do you solemnly swear that you will give true answers to such questions between this matter now and here before the court is held? Thank you.
You may proceed. Thank you. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
In a loud, clear voice, could you please state your name, and for the stenographer, could you spell your first name and your last name, please?
Katrina Freeman, Katrina Freeman.
Thank you. Ma'am, how old are you?
25.
And do you work?
Yes.
What do you do?
I do security at Beth Israel.
For purposes of what we call, this is a voir dire. I briefly told you what that means. I'm just going to ask you a few questions. This is different than, as we discussed, when you come back later to testify in front of the jury, okay? Do you know the Ricci family?
Yes.
How do you know them?
I dated Angel for 4 years.
And how old were you when you dated Angel?
17.
And so you dated him until you were around 21. Does that
Yep.
sound about right? Okay. And at some point, did you spend a lot of time at the Ricci household?
Yes.
Did you live there, in fact?
Yes.
How old were you when you lived with them?
I moved in when I was 17, actually 18 when I graduated. I was there until I was 21.
And when did you move out?
The end of 2020.
So around December 2020, is that right?
Yes.
And specifically for purposes of this voir dire, I'm just going to draw your attention to a particular incident that you had previously told the Commonwealth me about, okay? Do you recall an incident involving the defendant, Christine Ricci, with a knife?
Yes.
And could you tell me when you recall that, as we could call it, the knife incident occurring?
It was May 10th, 2020.
And do you remember if that was why that date stands out in your mind? Was it some sort of a special day?
Yeah, it was Mother's Day.
And with regard to that date, can you describe what it is you recall happening?
I had came home and there was some sort of argument, and I was in the basement and I was walking up the stairs, and Christine was on the floor with a knife, holding it to her wrist.
And who was in the area besides Christine?
Big Michael and Angel.
And when you say Big Michael, is that Michael Ricci Sr.?
Yes.
As opposed to Junior, who you call what?
Little Michael.
Okay. So Big Michael and Angel, and what were they doing?
Trying to stop her.
And where was Sophia?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And do you know where Junior was?
He wasn't living there at the time.
Okay. And one moment, please. And ma'am, what did you, when you got home that day, where did you come from?
My sister's house.
And when you walked in, what door did you walk into the home?
The side door.
And is that on, you described walking up or down from the basement. Could you describe that again?
I was walking up.
So had you entered in through the basement when you got home that day?
No, I came in the side door and had gone downstairs.
Okay. And then when you walked in, can you describe exactly what happened?
There was some sort of argument, and I had gone downstairs to get ready to leave because my dad was coming to pick me up.
And did you engage in any kind of conversation with Christine?
Yes.
And what did you say? Or what was said?
I don't remember the argument, but when I had seen what I saw, I asked her if she was really going to do that in front of her kids.
And what were Michael Sr. and Angel doing as it relates to Christine and the knife?
Trying to take it from her.
Were they able to?
I don't remember.
What did you do after you said what you said to her?
I left.
And what was your state of emotion or demeanor?
I was very upset.
And what was the last thing you saw downstairs before you left?
I'm not sure.
Was the situation still going on?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall talking to Angel about another incident involving a knife?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that?
I'm not sure exactly when it was. Me and Angel had gone home from my friend's house because little Michael had called him and told us to get home. And Angel had gone upstairs with little Michael, Christina, Big Michael, and I stayed outside in the car.
And at some point, did Angel tell you what had happened?
Yes.
And what did he tell you?
He told me that Christine went after Big Michael with a knife.
Did he say anything else?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And that was an incident that you were not present for, is that fair to say?
Yes.
And one moment, please. Nothing further at this time. Thank you.
Defense.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Did you review any of your text messages before coming in today?
No.
No. Okay. At the time that back in 2020, may I approach her on? Just to show her a phone number so I don't have to read it out in front of
Yes.
the cameras.
Sure. Thank you.
Does that look like your phone number at the time?
Yes.
And that contact name, Baby, was that your contact name in Angel's phone?
Yes.
You know? Okay. And you're suggesting that you remember that happening, correct? You having those observations of Christine with a knife in her hand on May 10th, 2020, correct?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't miss it. Okay, thank you.
May I approach?
You may.
I'll show you another document, another copy of the text. Again, that's your number right there at the top.
Yes.
correct? And the date on that is 5/10/2020, correct?
Yes.
And this is at approximately 11 p.m. at night, correct?
Yes.
And do I read this correctly? You say something like, no one is doing anything, right?
Yes.
And you had recently said something like Sophia's hurting herself. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And then Angel wrote back, so is my mom.
Yes.
And then he writes, she tried hurting herself today with the big knife, or tonight with the big knife. Is that what it says?
Yes.
And you don't respond, I remember I was there and saw it, correct? You
Yes.
respond, that's what Sophia said.
Yes.
Thank you.
May I approach, Honor?
You may.
Angel responds, Sophia doesn't know. And you respond, here, Sophia is the one that told me.
Yes.
Right. You don't say, I was there, I witnessed these things. You say that Sophia told you about the event with the big knife and Christine on May 10th, 2020.
Yes, but I was still there.
And Angel knew you were there.
Yes.
sort of curious that he thought he should tell you about the event with the big knife that he knew you witnessed.
We just had a conversation after I had left.
Okay. And you never say during any of your conversations with Angel that I was there for it, I saw part of it.
Probably not, because he knew that I was there.
And when you said that Sophia was the one that told you about it.
We must have just had a conversation about it.
Okay. Nothing further.
Other than the instance on May the 10th of 2020, other than that instance when you saw Ms. Ricci with the knife, was there any other time that you observed her with a knife in a self-harming way?
No,
Never.
never.
Just that one day on May the 10th.
Yes.
All right. Any other questions?
No, Your Honor.
The witness may step down. Parties wish to be heard?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go right ahead.
Your Honor, I think the text messages suggest that she wasn't there. I know that she said that she was, but under the circumstances, why would Angel be texting her details about the big knife event if she was there? And why would she say in response, because Sophia told me? Now, you've had an opportunity to look at the entirety of that text exchange because it was given to Your Honor yet last night. And I know that you saw that she had a completely different version of events in the text messages, including that she had to walk a long way. She was thrown out when they threatened to call the police on her at some point that day, and that she had walked a long way afterwards, not that someone had come and picked her up. So it's from my perspective, given the nature of the text messages, it's clear that that these two dates are wrong, or the date of May 10th, 2020 is wrong. It may be the case that she had an experience whereby she observed Ms. Ricci with a knife and it was one event, but I think she's conflating it with the May 10th event, which she heard about it. Maybe she felt it viscerally, maybe she imagined it vividly, and she truly believes that that's the event we're talking about, but it appears from the nature of the text messages that that's not the case. Also, though, to let her testify about what sounds like a very different event than what Angel is describing in his version of events from maybe June 6, 2019, is putting in two separate self-stabbing incidents, which have prior bad act concerns when it comes to cumulative prejudice. And I would ask that she not be allowed to testify to that. Certainly not the speech that she claims to have given to Ms. Ricci. But I think that even at a foundational level, there's the Commonwealth has not proven by a preponderance of evidence that on May 10th, 2020, this event occurred, given the nature of what the text messages say between Katrina Freeman and Angel Ricci. And under those circumstances, I think they should be excluded.
Thank you. Good morning again, Your Honor. The Commonwealth would argue that when we met with Katrina Freeman, she brought this incident up. We showed her no text messages. She remembered very clearly the date because it was meaningful to her. We've previously discussed this. She remembers being there. Part of the discovery indicated also she was under the influence that day. But what she just said was she was not there for the entirety of the event. She actually specifically said she left and doesn't know what happened thereafter, which lends to that, coupled with her drinking, lends to why this could be a bit confusing, but that ought not to preclude her from testifying to her memory of it. She has never wavered about the date and what she saw, never. Angel, on the other hand, I think confused times, dates, and by his own admission, he was unsure and he just adopted certain dates or events on cross-examination, unlike Katrina Freeman, who has been steadfast from the moment she was first spoken to, and continues to be in her recitation of those events. Whether or not she could testify to, if Your Honor finds it too prejudicial that she said to the defendant, you know, you're going to do this in front of your kids, obviously we'll abide by that ruling. But this does not preclude defense from cross-examining her about her, you know, could she be wrong? Is this something else? But I mean, we have that all the time, as we all know. We're experienced in this area here where witnesses remember things differently, and that's ripe for impeachment. And he is not precluded from doing so.
The fact that I would need to be forced to impeach her by putting in evidence that Sophia knew about this event, another extremely highly prejudicial thing in front of the jury, particularly when this is a cumulative fact. We already have evidence with regard to a stabbing and a self-harm incident. The idea that this is so important that it should be allowed in, and I should be allowed to cross-examine, knowing that in order to cross-examine, I have to put in all sorts of information about the kids knowing about this event, shows the Scylla and Charybdis that I'm in the situation, given how many prior bad acts have been put in. And it's not fair to force me on cross-examination to introduce facts which are harmful to the defendant in order to shed doubt on what is clearly a doubtful story given the nature of the text messages.
Right. The text messages as now described, and I did read through them all last night, are not inconsistent with what she is now saying on the stand. That is, she's saying that she came in to an ongoing argument. This is what she testifies to now, that she came in during an ongoing argument. It sounds like she stayed for a brief period of time, and when she left, the argument was still ongoing. It could be the case that because of that she came in during the ongoing argument, that the text messages actually make sense. That'll be for you to decide whether or not you want to cross-examine her and what the risks are associated with that cross-examination. But she has, it seems to me, a distinct memory of one instance and one instance only. She places it on May the 10th, 2020, some 6 months or 6.5 months before the stabbing. That is the incident that we're here for today. It's relevant to the jury's consideration. And you can choose strategically how you want to cross-examine her or not. There was testimony already that Sophia has been privy to arguments between the defendant and her husband, and it was not unknown to her the struggles that were going on in that family. So I don't find that the prejudice is on the as prejudicial as the defense would argue. With regard to the statement, you're going to do this on Mother's Day, or the question, that's not coming in. She can indicate what her activities were in the house, how long she was there. I don't know how long she was there. Sounds like she was there briefly. Again, she puts in her text messages that she walked a long way. I don't know what the reason for that is. We'll hear more of it on the longer questioning, whether she left. She said that her father was supposed to pick her up. I don't know if that doesn't happen because she leaves more readily than she had expected, didn't want to wait for dad. I don't know what the situation is, but that alone is not inconsistent enough in a way to make me discredit what I think is her memory, which has been recorded by the Commonwealth for now quite a long time. And she seems to be staying consistent with that. With regard to the risk that there's some other prior bad act, that's why I followed up with that last question. It is one instance and one instance only. And it is the case that often happens in many cases, that there is a disconnect between two witnesses who witnessed the same event, and that may be an honest misrecollection of when that happened. That'll be, again, for the jury to decide. Are there any other issues lingering with regard to Katrina?
No
Freeman.
issues lingering, Your Honor. I would ask that the court mark the series of text messages for identification.
Yes. What's the next number we're up to?
Your Honor.
E. The exchange of emails between Katrina Freeman and Angel Ricci will be marked as E for identification.
Thank you.
So
Let me have a copy of those emails.
And want to make sure it's the full packet, not just the 2-page exchange.
I believe, I think we gave the full packet yesterday, but we're happy to make another copy if necessary.
I think you need to because I wrote on it. Is there anything else the defense wants on mark for identification with regard to this issue?
Not marked for identification, no, Your Honor. I just want to talk about Katrina Freeman. In the text, there's all sorts of information where she categorizes the house as toxic and a number of other things. I just want to make sure that she's not allowed to testify to that either.
Well, I expect that the reason that she's being called based on the prior bad acts motion is to testify to her observations that I now understand she puts herself there for 4 years. So from 2016 to 2020. So I will allow her to testify to her observations. I won't allow her, consistent with my prior rulings, to characterize it as toxic. That's for the jury to decide whether it was a hostile relationship relevant to the decision-making on motive or not.
Your Honor, just so the record's abundantly clear, I did go over with this witness the court's rulings that she can testify to her general observations of the physical and verbal interactions between the defendant and the alleged victim. She cannot testify to the defendant's anxiety or other state of mind. She cannot testify to an argument with the defendant and Angel at a party where she allegedly feigned anxiety. Those were, I believe, the court's rulings in its entirety. I'll make sure she's not the next witness, but I'll make sure to touch base with her again to remind her that both witnesses, she and Janine, I went over kind of the same thing. They cannot make generalized characterizations, but observations are relevant.
All right, and I remind the parties with regard to the cue on the prior bad acts instruction, when you're going to hit it.
Yes, Your Honor.
We thumbs up on the jurors, so they're all in place and ready to go. Or
Well, if we're going to do Janine next,
I think she just said she wasn't the next witness, or she is.
Janine is.
Janine and then Katrina.
Janine, excuse
Yes.
me.
We, I think, have to have a conversation with the court about what's coming in with regard to the text messages that they want to put in. I'm happy to do it subject to redaction at sidebar, but I just want to flag it for the court so they know.
All right. What have you previously told me about this issue, if anything?
Should we approach, Your Honor, and I could, or would you like me to just hand up to the court the series? It's 3 series of text messages. The first dated November 6, 2018. Second grouping is January 30th, 2020. And the last grouping is March 18th, 2020. They'd be identified by Janine Bouchard as text messages she received from this defendant. Her name is saved in Janine's phone as Christine. They're dated. And they reference a lot of conversation about the affair and things of that nature. And they help to corroborate a timeline of events, Your Honor.
All right, I'll see you at the side of the bench so I can take a look at this.
Comfort break.
What the stickies on right
don't know if you have time. Do we have time for a comfort break, Your Honor?
Yes, certainly.
That's right.
But, hey, all persons with anything to do for this honorable justice, I am offended there. Justice of the Superior Court, now sitting for the Commonwealth, draw near, give your attendance, you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This honorable court is now in session. Please be seated.
Good morning, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Morning, you may.
Good morning, everyone. Before the court is a continuation in the jury trial in the matter of Commonwealth versus Christine Ricci. Ms. Ricci is present, is represented by attorneys Joshua Wood and Maura Barry, and the Commonwealth is represented by Assistant District Attorneys Jeremy Kuzman, Shannon Buckingham, and Jason Haran.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Good morning, jurors. Welcome back to the courthouse and to court report. We'll start today as we have started every day. Jurors, were you able to comply with my order that you not do any research about this case? Yes. Will you comply with my order that you not speak to anyone about this case? Yes. And you all still have open minds? Yes. With those three answers all given in the affirmative, we're ready to start today's work. Commonwealth may call its next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The Commonwealth calls Janine Bouchard.
Come on. Just head right to that officer right there, please.
Stop right there,
Do solemnly swear that the testimony and the evidence that you give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending in the Commonwealth and defendant at the bar to be the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
In a loud, clear voice, could you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for the record?
Janine Bouchard, Bouchard.
And what is your date of
Yeah, Janine, Janeen.
And ma'am, what is your date of birth?
8/26/70,
How old are you?
53,
And what city or town do you live in?
Pembroke.
And how long have you lived at the location that you're currently at?
Been there the last 9 years.
And the actual address is what?
212 Plymouth Street.
Are you employed?
I am.
And what do you do?
I'm a pediatric hospice and palliative care nurse.
How long have you been a pediatric hospice nurse?
About 8 years.
And can you describe what you do, some of your duties and responsibilities?
Your Honor, I would object to this with regard to.
She can give a foundation with regard to who the witness is, briefly.
Could you briefly tell us about duties and responsibilities in your job?
Caring for children who are terminally ill.
Thank you. And prior to you doing that job 8 years ago, were you employed in another capacity?
I've been a nurse for 20-something years, 22.
Okay. Going to draw your attention, ma'am, to the year 2018. Did you meet or know somebody by the name of Michael Ricci?
I did.
Where did you first meet him?
I met him at my stepmother's house.
And did you meet his family?
At some point,
And did you meet his wife?
that same time, yes.
And did you learn her name?
I'm sure.
Is her name Christine Ricci?
Yes.
And do you see her in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Could you please point to her and tell me an article of clothing she's wearing, please?
Light blue sweater.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the identification of the defendant.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
The record will reflect that the witness has identified the defendant.
And did you learn what Michael Ricci did for work when you got to know him?
I think when I first met him, I knew he worked for a friend, Mark, doing sprinkler systems.
Did you also know that he was a firefighter?
I learned that at some point.
Okay. And after you initially met Michael Ricci, did you, at your stepmother's house, did you see him again thereafter?
Yeah, a few times.
And where would you see him?
There or where she worked at the BBC.
And what is the BBC?
A restaurant and bar in Pembroke. Or it's not that anymore. I forget the name of it now.
And BBC stands for?
British Beer Company, I think.
Okay. Is that a bar restaurant?
Yes.
Okay. And how often would you go to the BBC?
A couple times a month.
And was there a particular day that you would go?
My friend and I would meet on like Thursdays, sometimes a Friday.
And did you have a particular friend that you would always go with, or would it vary?
Usually.
Who was
The
that?
same one, Danielle.
Was your job near there or your home? Is that why you chose to go there?
It was in Pembroke, but it was in between the two of our houses, and my stepmother worked there, so
And when you say in between two of our houses, are you referring to you and your friend Danielle?
yes.
Okay. And had you been going to the BBC on Thursdays prior to 2018, or was this something new?
Here and there. It wasn't every Thursday.
And did a friendship start between you and Michael Ricci?
Yes.
And how did that happen?
Just hanging out there. He would be there sometimes with a friend, Mark, or guys he worked with.
And was Mark, is that Mark McDonald?
Yes.
And was he a friend of yours as well, or did he become one?
He became, he was good friends with my dad. And when my dad passed and when he was sick, I got to know Mark more, and he stayed very good friends with my stepmother.
It's fair to say that you knew Mark McDonald before you knew Michael Ricci?
Yes.
Okay. And were there occasions when you and Michael Ricci would stay later than friends to talk at the bar?
Yes, once in a while.
And you got to know him?
Yes.
And how often, and again, we're talking about time period of, I'll draw your attention to the summer of 2018, going into the early fall. Were you still only going to the BBC one time a week?
Oh yeah, no more than that.
And would you say each time you would go there, you would see Michael on Thursdays?
Not every time.
And at some point, did you and Michael share with one another the state of your kind of personal affairs?
Yes.
And did that include the state of his marriage at the time?
Yes.
Did he wear a wedding band?
No.
What would Michael Ricci typically drink when you were with him?
Bud Light.
Did he ever drink anything hard alcohol?
Not that I saw.
Any shots?
No.
And how much would he typically consume when you would be with him? Was it any amount that concerned you?
No, maybe a handful.
And at some point after learning about the state of his marriage, did your friendship turn into something more?
Yes.
And when was that?
The end of August, very beginning of September.
And did it turn into a romantic relationship?
Yes.
And how long did that last?
It ended Columbus Day weekend, so maybe 6 weeks.
And how did it end?
He had texted me that I think Sunday morning and said, "We're over. I need to end this. I will call you later. Please don't say anything. Just listen."
And did you respond?
I don't remember. I think I just said, okay.
Were you confused?
Yes.
And after that initial text from Michael Ricci, did you hear again from him that weekend?
No.
Did you hear again?
Oh, yes. Oh, he texted, then he called later that evening.
And this was Columbus Day weekend of 2018,
Yes.
which would have been in October, correct?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did he say when he called you?
Basically, we're over. You never meant anything to me. It was very scripted, just a few.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
It's stricken. You said it was over. You never meant anything to me.
Yes.
And did you hear from him again after that?
Yeah, a couple months, maybe a month or two later, I had several missed calls one night. I don't know, like in 10, 11 o'clock at night. I did not call him back. And then I think days later, there was another couple missed calls, and then another call I did answer.
Okay. And during November 2018, so shortly after things ended with Michael Ricci, who, if anyone, did you receive text messages from?
Christine.
May I approach the witness, please?
You may.
I'm just going to ask you to take a look at it's 3 pages, just going into the top of the 3rd page, and take a look at that, read it to yourself, and tell me if you recognize it, please.
I thought you didn't have to redact.
Do you
Yes.
recognize that series of text messages?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that to be?
The text I received from Christine.
And is that a fair and accurate depiction of the text messages that she initiated with you on November 6, 2018?
Yes.
I'd ask that this be marked as the next exhibit, subject to redaction. If they're actually this one, I don't think that's one.
Is there any further
renewing.
objection to this one?
Renewing my objection.
I note your renewed objection as redacted. It'll be marked and admitted as exhibit 32.
nature of her initial communication with you on this text message, ma'am?
Objection, Your Honor. It speaks for itself, doesn't it?
I'll let it go through it.
Could you repeat that?
Yes. Could you tell us about this? May I approach again, Your Honor?
May.
Well, actually,
It-
I don't need to yet. Ma'am, could you tell me what the text message, the gist of the text message was?
I'll
Objection.
see you at the side of the bench.
May I continue?
You may.
With regard to exhibit number 32, ma'am. Just showing you that on the larger screen. Is this the initial text message that you received from Christine Ricci?
Yes.
Fair to say it's dated November 6, 2018, 10:50 a.m.
Yes.
And during the course of this conversation, that was the first time she had reached out to you either by calling or texting, correct?
Yes.
And fair to say she indicates that she's contemplated going back and forth on what exactly she wanted to say to you. That's how she starts it off.
Yes.
And within the body of this text message, she indicates that you both had a part to play in this, and she's referring to the affair, correct?
Yes.
And then she proceeds to tell you you have nothing, you have no guilt, no morals, not even a respect for your own family, correct?
Yes.
And that you disrespected her, correct?
Correct.
And now showing you page 2, this is fair to say a continuation of the initial text message we were just referring to. And she speaks about people that she knows in your family and having respect for those people. Is that right?
Yes.
And she also references the fact that Michael Ricci owns that he made a big mistake.
Yes.
And she proceeds to tell you to stay away from her husband and her family, correct?
Correct.
And that if you see her, you should walk in the other direction, correct?
Right.
And then the last page of that series of November 6, 2018 message. She ends it by saying, if you see him, you should do the same, meaning go the other direction, correct?
Yes.
And she ends it by saying, you stepped into my world, and since you don't know me, I suggest you find your way out and stay out, correct?
Yes.
And how did you know who that text was from, ma'am?
Just by the context.
And then at some point, did you put her name as Christine in your phone so you knew it was her?
Yes.
Okay. And was that the only text she sent you?
At that time, yes.
And did you respond to that series of text messages? Drawing your attention, ma'am, to end of November, beginning of December of 2018, what, if any, missed calls did you receive?
Those were the calls
From
in the
whom?
middle of the night, Michael's phone.
How many times did his phone number call you?
At least 7 or 8.
And this was approximately 2 months after your relationship ended with him. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Did you call back that number after all of those missed calls?
No.
At some point, did you finally pick up the phone after the 7 or 8 missed calls?
Yes.
And who was on the other line?
Michael.
And what did he say to you?
Again, I don't love you. I didn't love you. I love my wife.
Okay. And how did he sound?
Very
Objection.
monotone.
Overall, how did he sound?
Very monotone.
And what did you say?
I just said, okay.
And once he ended your short relationship, did you ever call or text him unprompted?
No.
Did you ever call or text the defendant unprompted?
No.
Now, drawing your attention, ma'am, to December of 2019, did you see the defendant?
Yes.
Where?
At my house.
And that's at 212 Plymouth Street in Pembroke?
Yes.
And approximately what time of day was this?
In the evening, I'd say 6, 7.
Was it dark outside?
Yes.
And could you describe what happened, ma'am?
She knocked on the door and I opened it and she said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Seriously?" And I realized it was her. So I stepped outside. She said, "I need to talk to you." So I stepped outside on the deck.
Was anyone else home?
I don't think so.
And how did she appear, namely Christine?
At first, started yelling and screaming.
Well-
And then,
Yep.
go ahead.
I'm sorry. So at first she was yelling and screaming. Was she, what was she yelling and screaming?
How could you do this to me? That was my husband. And should I continue?
Did she say other things initially as well?
She was kind of all over the place. There was yelling and screaming. There was crying. There was calmness. I had explained that I was told that their marriage was over, that they both mutually agreed to separate, that she was seeing somebody else. She wasn't wearing her rings.
I would object, Your Honor, and move to strike.
All right, which portion are you moving? I'll see you at the side of the bench. Jurors, before we go further in this testimony, I'm going to give you a limiting instruction with regard to prior bad acts. You heard this earlier. I'm going to remind you of it now. You are about to hear some evidence which concerns an encounter alleged to have occurred between the defendant and this witness before the incidents which are the subject of the charged crimes in this case. This evidence is to show the nature of the relationship between the defendant and the witness and the defendant insofar as it may bear on the issues of a possible motive and the defendant's intent in this case. Like all evidence, it's up to you to decide whether you believe it or you do not, and to decide what weight that evidence should have. This evidence is not introduced, however, to show that the defendant had a bad character or propensity for violence. You may not consider the evidence for those purposes. The defendant is not charged with committing any crimes with respect to this case other than the charges contained in the indictments in this case. You may not consider such conduct as a substitution for proof that the defendant committed the crimes charged, nor may you consider it as proof that the defendant has a criminal propensity, personality, or bad character. You may consider such evidence solely on the limited issues of the defendant's state of mind, motive, and intent with respect to the indictments in this case. You may not consider this evidence for any other purpose. Specifically, you may not use it to conclude that if the defendant committed the other acts, she was more likely to have committed the crimes charged in the indictments. You may proceed.
Thank you. Ma'am, just getting back to where we left off, when you said those things to the defendant with regard to thinking they were done and things of that nature, what was her response?
She agreed.
And what did you say?
I said, well, if you both agreed that the marriage was over and that you had moved on, he was moving on, you had a conversation, then why am I wrong to think that that we couldn't date? And she said, because he was my husband.
And what, if any, other questions did the defendant ask you as it related to your relationship with Michael Ricci?
She asked a lot about dates, where I was on certain dates. I didn't recall a lot of them. She had asked if he had bought me a birthday present. Just more so about dates and where I was and what we did.
And what, if anything, did Christine say about a recent phone call you received from Michael?
Objection, Your Honor. Same one, renewed.
Same basis.
Yes.
I overrule the objection for the reasons stated at the side of the bench.
You can answer that.
She said that she was listening in on both times he called.
And during the course of her visit to your home that night in December of 2019, did Christine Ricci's demeanor change at all in the course of the conversation?
Yes, there was yelling, there was crying, there was some calmness, there was conversation.
And during the course of that conversation, what, if anything, were you saying about your part in it?
I told her I was truly sorry for my part, that I wish that I had waited for them to truly be legally divorced before anything moved on in our relationship. And, you know, I can't take it back, but I do apologize and I wish them happiness.
And how long was your conversation with Christine Ricci on that date, if you recall?
I'd say at least an hour.
And how did the conversation end?
She said she forgives me and she asked if she could give me a hug.
Did you hug?
Yes.
And drawing your attention, ma'am, to January 30th, 2020, did you receive a call from the defendant?
I had a voicemail, yes.
And what did you listen to the voicemail?
Yes.
And what did she say?
She asked if her and Michael could come over and see me and talk because she thought he needed that for his therapy.
And that was a message she had left?
Yes.
And where were you when you received the voice message?
At work.
Did you respond?
A little while later, I texted her.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is the January.
Yeah.
I think we're okay on this one.
May I approach?
Yes.
Thank you. Ma'am, I'm just going to ask you to take a look at another few pages of documents. I believe it's 4 pages, starting with January 30th, 2020 at 1:40 p.m. If you could just start and read that to yourself into the next few pages and let me know if you recognize that series of messages, please.
Okay. Yes.
You recognize that, ma'am?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
I had texted her after the voicemail and then she responded.
And is this a fair and accurate depiction of your text conversation with Christine Ricci on January 30th, 2020 at 1:40 p.m.?
Yes.
I'd ask that this be marked as the next exhibit, please.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor.
Renewed?
Yes.
I understand the objection. It's overruled. It'll be admitted as Exhibit 33. Thank you.
May I publish this and question the witness?
You may.
Thank you. Ma'am, just showing you what was just marked as Exhibit 33. Fair to say that you initiated the text conversation on January 30th, 2020 at 1:40, correct?
Yes.
And you initiated that text conversation after the phone call you just described, the message you received from Christine Ricci?
Yes.
And in this text message, you indicate hello to her and that you just got her message, you're at work, so you can't talk. And then you indicated if you guys want to call after 4 for a quick conversation, that's fine. And then you further indicated you don't want to see them in person. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And did you receive a text message back from her?
Yes.
And that's a message from Christine Ricci, correct?
Yes.
And just so we're clear, at the top of the page, it indicates Christine, and that's how you knew it was from her, correct?
Yes.
And in this response, she indicates she understands your hesitancy to see Michael Ricci and how difficult it must be, but that they are working on therapy and talking to you is something that the therapist thought would be a good idea for his therapy. Is that correct?
Yes.
And she further indicates in the series of messages that she also had a few things she's confused about, and she wants to be able to get some answers from you, correct?
Yes.
And that, just moving on to the next page. The end of that text chain indicates basically if she could get some thoughts straightened out, she could better help her daughter understand what's going on. And she's not asking to go inside your home. She's just asking for a sit down outside, correct?
Yes.
And then you texted her back indicating you know this is a process and you were wishing that they both could heal and move on, correct?
Yes,
And again, as you indicated earlier, you wish to her that the two of them would be happy and that your therapist advised that you have to set boundaries as it relates to this situation, correct?
yes,
And then you end it by saying, I can't express enough how unbelievably sorry you are, correct?
yes,
And then it continues on and Christine continues to text back, correct?
yes,
And then she asks if you would mind if she called you because she needs to get questions answered to piece things together to understand what was happening in Michael Ricci's mind, correct?
yes.
And then you indicated you have a few minutes now. And at that point, she indicates, okay, give me a minute to go outside, correct?
Yes.
And ultimately, did you speak to her on the phone that day?
Yes.
And did you speak to her? Do you know if Michael was on the phone as well?
I didn't hear him.
Okay. And what was the nature of that conversation?
She had another couple dates that she needed to know about.
Anything stand out in your mind as to a specific time or date she was inquiring about?
I don't remember the date now, but I remember when she asked the date, she asked about there was a benefit for Officer Chestnut at the BBC, and I was out of town, out of the state. I was on a work conference in Memphis. So I said I was not there, so I can't help you.
And then the conversation ended, is that fair to say?
Yes.
And now drawing your attention to March 18th, 2020, did something happen on this day?
Yes.
Where were you?
I had just gotten home from work.
And what are your hours like, or what were your hours like on this particular time frame we're referring to?
I know I got home a little later. My typical hours are 8 to 4, but if there's a child, actively passing away, I don't leave right away.
Okay. And who was at home with you when you got to your home?
My daughter,
And how old was your daughter at the time?
21.
And could you describe what happened?
It was the beginning of COVID. So as soon as I came in, I took my scrubs off and I was about to get in the shower.
And what happened?
My daughter came into my room and said that Christine was there.
And do you recall if it was dark or light out?
It was at least dusk. I can't remember if it was dark. I don't think it was that dark.
Was this a planned visit?
I didn't know about it, no.
Okay. And what, if anything, happened next?
I told my daughter to tell her to leave, that I had nothing else to say. And then my daughter came back in and said she's not leaving until she talks to you. So she said, I told her that if she doesn't leave, I'm going to call the police.
Okay.
And I said, go ahead. And then I received a text from Christine.
Okay, hold on. I'll get to that.
Okay.
So as this was going on, were you able to see Christine, or was she strictly talking to your daughter?
Just my daughter.
And where was Christine in relationship to your daughter, if you know?
Outside, as far as I know.
Okay. And you indicated that as this was going on, you also received a text message. Is that right?
Yes.
May I approach?
You may.
Another series, 3 pages, starting with where it says March 18th, 2020 at 6:51 p.m. I'd ask you to just take a look at that in the next couple of pages and look up when you're done reading it yourself. Let me know if you recognize it. Do you recognize it, ma'am?
Yes.
And what do you recognize it to be?
Her text while I was getting ready to get in the shower.
And this is a fair and accurate depiction of the series of text messages on March 18th, 2020, initiated by Christine Ricci.
Yes.
I'd ask that this be marked as an exhibit.
Subject to the earlier objections. Any other objections, Attorney Wood?
No, Your Honor.
All right. I overruled the objection. It'll be admitted as Exhibit 34.
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I publish and question the witness?
You may.
Thank you. Ma'am, showing you what's now marked as Exhibit 34, starting with the first message dated March 18, 2020 at 6:51 p.m. Is this a text message from the defendant?
Yes.
And she's texting you while she's at your house?
Yes.
And she indicates she'd like to speak to you. And then if and it says calls the cops, assuming that means calls the cops, I will have all of it plastered everywhere for all to know.
Yes.
And it continues on to the next page where she indicates, call the cops and we could have it out in open court for public record, your choice, correct?
Yes.
And then you respond by saying she got scared, she called already, you could have just called me. Who are you referring to?
My daughter.
And then, again, this is while Christine Ricci is still at your house that this series of text messages is occurring.
Yes.
And then the defendant, Christine Ricci, indicates she asked to speak to you nicely. And she said, meaning your daughter, you were in the shower, and she indicates she told your daughter she'd wait, at which point your daughter told her to leave. And then the defendant says, you could just open the door and talk to me. I know you're right there. I need to speak to you face to face. If you want to involve the police, that's on you, but just know it's only going to hurt you, correct?
Yes.
And again, just so it's clear, the date of this is March 18th, 2020, correct?
Yes.
And you indicate there's nothing else you can say. You've apologized as much as you can, correct?
Yes.
And then lastly, she indicates, but there's a voicemail I have that I would like explained, correct?
Yes.
At some point, ma'am, did you go outside?
No.
Did you make observations of what was going on outside?
I could hear.
And did you hear the defendant when you were inside?
Yes.
And what were you hearing the defendant saying?
Her yelling. I just need to, well, at this point, the police had showed up.
Okay.
And so she was yelling to them, I need to talk to her. I just have a question. And then she started screaming, she takes care of dying children. Do you know who she is? I'm going to put this all over social media. And they kept asking her to leave. And she kept saying, I'm not leaving until I talk to her.
Okay. And her tone of voice?
Screaming.
At some point, did the defendant leave your home that night?
Yes.
And how long was the defendant being asked to leave, either by your daughter or the police, before she actually left?
Oh, I don't, if I had to guess, I'd say like 15 minutes. They kept asking her.
When the police
The
arrived?
police officers, yeah.
But prior to that, she had been at your home for a while asking to talk to you?
Yes.
And ma'am, how long in total were you friends with Michael Ricci?
I mean, I had met him once or twice before 2018, so I wouldn't consider that friendship, but I'd say 8 months.
Okay. And during the times you spent with him, what, if any observations did you make of erratic behavior on his part?
Objection, Your Honor.
See at the side of the bench?
Ma'am, during the 8 months of your friendship with Michael Ricci, can you describe observations you made of him generally?
He was very kind, very sweet, very calm nature.
Did you ever make any observations of him in terms of his sobriety or his level of intoxication when you would be with him?
What do you mean?
Did you ever see him drunk?
No.
May I have one moment, please?
You may.
Thank you.
Briefly at sidebar, if I could.
Yes.
You had met Michael Ricci.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Ron. Good morning, ma'am.
Come on.
You said that you had met Michael Ricci for the first time at a Super Bowl party in 2017. Is that right?
I don't remember the year, but it was before 2018,
Yeah. So maybe about a year before 2018.
maybe.
Okay. And that was at your stepmother Tricia's house, correct?
Yes.
Now, your stepmother Trish was already friends with Michael, wasn't she? She
Yes.
knew him, and she knew him through his friend Mac or Mark McDonald,
Yes.
and they were pretty close, right?
Yes.
Your stepmother Trish was at the time the bartender at that Pembroke British Beer Company,
Yes.
and you said that you wouldn't come in very often over that 8-month period in 2018, maybe once a week, something like that, right?
Yes.
And when you would come there, it would either be Thursday, sometimes it would be Friday, but it was usually just one day a week that you would sit down and you'd have a couple of drinks with your friend Danielle.
Yes.
And when you would go there, very often the guys from the MCC company would be there, right?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah. They were kind of regulars, weren't they?
I mean, I was only 1 day a week. I don't know.
But you also have a relationship with Trish,
Yes.
and she knew these guys pretty well,
Yes.
correct? And you would have understood them to be regulars as a result of your relationship with Trish and what she knew about them, correct?
I mean, she was friends with them outside of there too. They were friends with my dad and
Mhm.
prior to, I mean, outside of the BBC.
But when you would see Michael over that 8-month period, it was largely at the BBC.
Yes.
And when you would come in, even if it was a Friday, you'd often see him there, right? And you'd have some socializing while you were drinking with your friend Danielle.
Sometimes if it wasn't him, it was maybe Mac or another, another guy that worked with them, a younger guy.
Okay. And sometimes he'd be there. Sometimes Michael would be there without Mac, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah. When you saw Michael at the BBC, would he be in the restaurant portion of the BBC or would he be over in the bar section of the BBC?
In the bar area.
Okay. And would he be eating or would he be having a drink?
I mean, sometimes they'd be eating. Sometimes it was just a beer or two, I
Okay.
guess.
He was always drinking a beer though when he was at the BBC, right? In your memory?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. And the entire time that you would spend time with him at the BBC, he would have beers. You said a handful, right?
Yes,
And does that mean anywhere up to about 5 or 6?
probably.
Now, obviously, during this time, you're seeing Michael Ricci kind of once a week at the bar. You're not seeing whatever he's drinking outside of the BBC. You just know what he's drinking there, right?
Right.
Now, in 2018, Trish was still good friends with Michael, right?
Yes.
She knew about she would have known about his marriage situation, right?
I don't know what they talked about.
Did you ever talk to her about it?
After it became romantic with him, yes.
Okay. And you were aware that when you first met him at that Super Bowl party, he was there with his family, right?
I don't remember. He was there a few times throughout the years.
Mhm.
I think only once I saw the family with them.
Okay. Do you think that that was before 2018?
Yes,
So you were aware that he was married, of course,
yes,
right? And you had met his daughter, right?
yes,
Okay. Now, his friend, meaning Michael's friend, Mac,
Yep.
ended up getting married at your stepmother, Trisha's house, right?
yes,
And that was in August of 2018.
yes,
Okay. At this point, you and Michael had been, were you guys already romantically involved or not quite
Yeah.
yet? Okay. But you'd been seeing each other regularly at the BBC at
Yeah,
that
I mean, it
point?
definitely wasn't weekly. Sometimes it was once a month, sometimes it was a few times a month.
Okay. And sometimes it was as often as once a week?
Yes,
Okay. So you were already seeing him pretty regularly at the BBC by August of 2018 at Tammy and Mac's wedding.
yes.
And when he came to the wedding, did he come alone or did he come with someone?
His wife was there. I don't remember if the kids were there.
Do you remember Sophia being there?
I don't recall.
Do you remember having a conversation with Sophia there?
No.
No. Okay. So in August of 2018, was it your understanding that Michael was still living in the marital home?
Yes,
Okay. So you understood that he was married still, had kids still, and that he was living in the marital home.
yes.
Obviously, at that time, you weren't looking to start a relationship with a happily married man.
No.
Correct? So he told you he was practically divorced already, right?
By the end of August, he had said that they both agreed that the marriage was over.
Thereby overcoming your objection to having a romantic relationship with him.
Yes,
And then you felt comfortable having a relationship, which is what he wanted, right?
yes,
Throughout your relationship, you continued to live at the marital home, correct?
yes.
And I want to talk a little bit about the progression of the relationship. Would all of your meetings still be at the BBC, or did he come to your house?
He came to my house. We would meet at the beach.
Uh-huh.
We went out and grabbed a pizza.
Okay. And that whole process from the moment it became a romantic relationship until that call on, what was it, Columbus Day weekend in October 18?
Yes,
That would have been about how long?
6-ish weeks, six,
6
7.
issues. Okay. Now, do you remember receiving a call from Michael at the beginning of that same weekend that you received that call where he was like breaking up with you?
At the beginning of that weekend?
Yeah, where at some point did he call you and tell you, I've told him I'm leaving the family?
I talked to him before the weekend, maybe Thursday. And he
Right.
said that he and Christine had sat down and talked it out. They talked about who was going to stay in the home, who, what their plans were.
Right. And you were surprised by that, weren't you? Because you thought they had already had that conversation.
Well, he said that they had had different conversations. He said that at one point Christine told him, if you're only staying for Sophia.
I'm just asking you what he told you about the fact that he had a conversation at the beginning of that weekend saying that he was going to be, that they had finalized and he was going to be leaving his wife.
Yes, and he said that they were going to sit down and tell the children over the weekend.
So in other words, at the beginning of the weekend, he was saying, I'm leaving my wife and we're about to tell the children. And then just 3 days later, he's calling you with that phone conversation that you earlier described.
Yeah, he didn't say he was leaving his wife. He said their marriage was over.
But he was part of their plan that he was going to be leaving the marital home at that point?
Yes.
Okay. And when he said that to you, did he express any interest in moving in with you? Was that expressed during that phone conversation
No.
or not?
No.
Because you weren't there yet, right?
It just hadn't come up, no.
Yeah. Okay. Did he give any indication of where he was going to be living?
No, he had mentioned that a lot of times he'll stay at work, and I don't know. I assume that's the firehouse.
Was it your understanding that someone could live at the firehouse all the time?
I have no idea.
Okay. All right. After that phone conversation in October of 2018, when he tells you, look, we're over, and says all the other stuff that was probably unnecessary, do you ever see him at the BBC again?
Nope.
Okay. And is it your understanding that at that point he stopped sort of working with Mac, or do you not know that?
I didn't learn that till much later.
Okay. Did you get the impression during the conversation that Michael had with you at the beginning of the weekend where he said, well, we finalized everything? Did he give any indication about a sense that this was a serious relationship with you at that point?
I don't really recall exactly how it went.
Mhm.
I wouldn't say those words.
Okay. Did it seem like he was much more serious about you than you were about him during that phone conversation?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. It must have come as a huge shock that on Thursday, say, he's saying, I'm leaving my wife. And then on Sunday, he's calling you and saying, plans are off and we're over.
Yes.
Do you remember calling and leaving a message for him at work to sort of just figure out what it was that he was talking about after that?
I don't recall. I wouldn't have called his work. I don't know.
You don't remember leaving a voice message saying like what was going on with that phone call?
I don't recall doing that now.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the December of 2019 sit down with Christine, if I could.
Yes.
Okay. Before that December 2019 sit down, you hadn't heard anything from Christine since the previous November, right?
Correct.
And when you sat down and talked with her, it was clear that she was having a lot of emotions, correct?
Yes.
But at the very end of the conversation, it was clear that you were talking about forgiveness, and you actually even ended with a hug, right?
That's correct.
She had a lot of questions you mentioned about particulars, right? Did it become clear from the questions that she was asking that Michael wasn't giving her the answers that she wanted?
Objection. Sustained as to that form.
Did she seem to want to know a lot of questions that anyone who had lived through the experience that you had lived through would have been able to state without problem?
Sustained.
Was it clear from your conversation with Christine that there was a lot that she didn't know about your relationship with Michael?
Most of the questions were dates. Where was I on certain dates?
And she didn't know the answer to those dates because she wasn't getting them anywhere else, right?
Objection. Sustained.
Well, did she tell you that Michael wasn't able to answer these questions?
No, she just asked where I was on certain dates, and I couldn't even recall those certain dates.
Were you aware at that time, or did she tell you during that conversation that Michael was claiming to have broad-based problems with his memory?
No.
Was it your understanding during that conversation that Michael was in Alcoholics Anonymous?
She just said that he was doing better, that they had renewed their vows in Hawaii. They were doing great.
And that they were in therapy?
She did at some point, I don't know if it was that conversation or just the text, she did mention that they were in therapy.
And that he was in therapy on his own?
I don't know.
Okay. When she came to your house in January of 2020 and spoke with your daughter, was she asking to come in your house?
It was March.
I'm sorry, March, when she was asking to come in your house?
I don't know I don't know the conversation with my daughter, but
Okay,
all I heard is that she wanted to talk to me.
okay. And you weren't willing to talk to her at that point?
No.
Okay. Now, are you still close with Mark McDonald?
Probably not as close.
But you still see each other a lot?
No.
Do you see?
Once in a while.
Yeah, once in a while.
Mhm.
Okay. Do you remember talking to the police on the March 18th date and describing the conversation that you'd had in December of 2019 with Ms. Ricci as a civil conversation about the affair?
I don't recall that. I just remember the officer coming in and he asked what happened. I gave a quick recap of
Mhm.
she was screaming outside, do you know who she is? She
Okay.
slept with my husband. And I
Okay.
said, I did have a relationship with her husband. And then he said, I need to hear
Are
you
you-
say.
Are you saying, just in
Objection, Your
response to my question, are you saying that you don't remember if you told the police that the conversation in December was civil?
I do not recall that.
Would looking at the report, would that refresh your recollection, do you think?
Sure.
You could just take a look at the underlined portion and look up when you're done. Does that help refresh your recollection?
I mean, it isn't exactly what was said. I'd never said I had an affair with him.
You never said that. But you did describe the the December 2019 conversation with Christine as being civil.
If anything, I would have said it was civil. It was emotional.
Mhm.
There were times that were civil.
Okay.
Yes.
Nothing further.
Redirect.
Few questions, please. Ma'am, defense counsel asked you about the fact that you knew Michael Ricci was married with children, correct?
Yes.
When a decision was made for the two of you to have more than a friendship, is it fair to say, although you knew he was married, you believed you understood the state of his marriage to be less than good at that point, correct?
Yes.
And that was based on statements he made to you about what was going on with Christine Ricci and his marriage, correct?
Yes.
And defense counsel asked you about how when you saw Michael Ricci at Mac's wedding, at that point you were not looking to engage with a happily married man or get involved in with a happily married man, correct?
Correct.
As far as you knew, based on your friendship with Michael Ricci, by the end of August, was he a happily married man?
No.
What had he told you?
He just told,
Objection, Your Honor.
I think it's cumulative. This is at this point. Jury's heard it.
I'll move on. With regard to the conversation defense counsel asked you at the beginning of Columbus Day weekend, the Thursday, I think you said, compared to then a few days later, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about that. Could you tell us about the nature of the conversation with Michael Ricci at the beginning of Columbus Day weekend on that Thursday?
he had said that they were having a conversation, that they had been talking about how things would go, separating, and that they had made a plan to sit down and talk to the children that weekend.
And then a few days later is when you got another call from him and text, correct?
Yes.
And how did, I know you testified to this earlier, but defense counsel asked you, were you surprised that a few days later, everything kind of changed?
Yes.
And defense counsel asked you about memory issues and that's why Christine was asking about dates and times. You remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
What, if any, observations did you make of any issues with memory on behalf of Michael Ricci during the time you spent with him?
I've never noticed any memory issues.
And lastly, defense counsel was asking you about some sort of March 18th conversation and it being civil. And you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
And what exactly, I believe you were trying to tell us, what exactly did you tell the police was happening?
One of the officers came in and said, you know, could you let me know what happened? I said that Michael and I had had a relationship I thought they were separated and that she had come over once before. We've talked. I've apologized. She's accepted. She said they were happy, and now she is here again for more questions.
And you mentioned something about that you told the police that the defendant was screaming.
I don't remember exactly what I told the police, but I told him that that she had been there before and there was an emotional conversation and it ended civil, or I don't know what words I used, but
And that was the conversation where you hugged and
Yes.
kind of there was forgiveness going
Yes.
on, correct? Now, with regard to the final time when the police arrived at your home, was that conversation civil? Well, was it even a conversation with you and her?
I did not talk to her. She was just screaming the whole time.
And could you hear that, her screaming when you were inside?
Yes.
And compared to that other kind of, we'll call it the civil conversation where you hugged it out at the end, I believe you described that her emotion and her demeanor changed pretty dramatically. Is that right?
Correct.
On this last occasion, March of 2020, did her demeanor change at all?
No. I mean, I didn't see her, but she was yelling the whole time.
Nothing further.
Any recross?
At the beginning of the March 18th, 2020 event, when she was talking with your daughter, Quinn, you were in the shower, correct?
I was getting ready to get in the
And-
shower.
And getting ready. Did you end up taking a shower or not?
No.
Okay, but you remained in the other room, correct?
Until the police came in, yes.
Till the police came. And she didn't start yelling until after the police had come, correct?
I was in the bathroom far away from the front door, so I don't know. I couldn't hear her if she
Okay.
was.
So the previous questioning about how she was always yelling the whole time, you're not sure. You just know that she was yelling sort of at the end when the police arrived.
From the time I could hear her,
Right.
yes.
Okay. Nothing further.
The witness may step down.
Thank you.
The Commonwealth may call its next witness.
Katrina Freeman, please.
Sure, given our late, a little delayed start this morning, I'm going to run you to about 11:30 before the break, all right? If anybody has a problem with that, you let me know.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony of the court and jury that are now in Commonwealth defendant bar will be true, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
You may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, ma'am.
Morning.
In a loud, clear voice, could you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your first and last name, please?
Katrina Freeman, KatrinaFreeman.
Thank you, ma'am. And your date of birth?
3/27/99,
How old are you?
25,
And what city or town do you currently live in?
Pembroke,
How long have you lived in Pembroke?
2 years.
Can you describe what your level of schooling is?
Just got my high school diploma.
And then did you begin working?
Yes,
And are you currently employed?
yes.
Where are you employed?
Beth Israel,
In what capacity?
I do security.
How long have you been doing Beth Israel security?
2 years.
What did you do before then?
I did housekeeping.
And do you know the Ricci family, ma'am?
Yes,
How do you know them?
I dated their son for 4 years,
Which son?
Angel Ricci,
How old were you when you dated Angel Ricci?
17, until I was 21.
And how did you meet him?
I met him when we both worked at Kohl's
And where's the Coles?
in Pembroke.
Who, if anyone else from his family, worked at Coles with you?
Christine Ricci.
Do you see her in the courtroom today?
Yes,
Could you please point to her and tell me an article of clothing she's wearing?
blue blazer.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the identification made by the witness of the defendant, please?
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
The record will reflect the witnesses identified the defendant.
Thank you. And who did you meet first? Was it Christine Ritchie or Angel Ritchie?
Christine.
And could you describe what your relationship was like when you first met Christine, please?
We were friendly at work. Became friends on Facebook.
And over the course of the next few years that you were dating Angel, did your relationship with Christine become closer?
Yes.
And how long did you work with them, namely Angel and Christine at Kohl's?
Probably close to 2 years.
And at some point, did you meet the rest of the Ritchie family?
Yes. Soon
And-
after we started dating.
And did you go to their home in Marshfield?
Yes.
Is that where you met the rest of the family?
Yes.
And could you describe who else you met?
Michael Sr., Michael Jr., and Sophia.
And did you have kind of a nickname when talking about Michael Sr. versus Michael Jr.?
Big Michael and Little Michael.
Okay. And who is Angel to Big Michael or Michael Sr.?
Angel is Michael's adopted son.
And do you remember the first time you met Michael Sr.?
Yes.
How did you meet him?
I just went over to the house one day and he was there.
And what was your relationship like with him?
Just a good relationship. We weren't too close in the beginning.
We're not too close?
Yeah.
Was he, did you speak often, or was it more a relationship you had with Christine in terms of how much you communicated with the family?
Closer with Christine.
And did you start off by being friends with Angel and then go into a dating relationship, or did you immediately start dating?
Immediately started dating.
And how often would you spend time with Angel and his family?
I was over the house maybe 3 to 4 days a week.
And I'm sorry if you already answered this. He has a younger sister as well, is that right?
Yes.
And her name?
Sophia Ritchie.
And what was your relationship like with Sophia?
We were very close.
And what about with Michael Jr.?
We weren't close in the beginning until about 2 years later.
So about halfway into your 4-year dating relationship with Angel, you became closer with him?
Yes.
And do you recall the address in which the Ritchie family lived?
679 Maureen Street, Marshfield.
And at some point into your dating relationship with Angel, did your living arrangement change?
Yes.
Where had you been living?
At home with my family.
In the town of Pembroke?
Hanson.
Oh, in Hanson, I'm sorry. And then how did your living arrangement change?
When I graduated in 2017, soon after that, I had moved in.
Did you have your own room or did you share a room?
I shared a room with Angel
And where was his room?
in the basement.
And how soon after you graduated did you move in?
Maybe a month or two.
And once you moved in, did you become even closer to Christine Ritchie?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did the defendant, Christine Ritchie, do besides work with you at Kohl's?
She did Zumba.
And do you know where she would teach Zumba or just go to Zumba classes? Do you recall?
She did both. She would go all over the place.
And when you say go all over the place, what are you referring to?
Go to different places around to teach class or take trips.
Like a Zumba cruise?
Yes.
And what years are we referring to, excuse me, just to be clear as to when you began living with them?
2017.
And just want to show you a number of photographs. May I approach, please?
You may.
Thank you. Ma'am, I'm just going to ask you to take a look at a series of photographs and tell me if you recognize what's contained in the photographs.
Outside of the house.
Okay, and the house you're referring to, is that the Marine Street address?
Yes.
Okay, and are those all fair and accurate depictions of the exterior of that location?
Yes.
679 Marine Street?
Yes.
Okay, I ask that each of these be marked as exhibits, Your Honor, and then request to publish them as I ask for further questions.
How many photos are there, Madam Prosecutor?
Seven. Would you like them to be marked as a group?
We've been marking everything individually, so I'll have them marked that way. 36 through 41, excuse me, 35 through 41.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Is there any objection to that? I took it from your body language earlier that
Your
there
Honor.
was not. Thank you. Thank you.
Ma'am, I'm just going to ask you to take a look at what was previously marked as Exhibit 35. Do you recognize this to be a particular location?
That is the front of the house.
And I'm pointing now to a door. Is that the front door?
Yes.
And if you can, with Your Honor's permission, if the witness could get off the stand and just describe what rooms are where in the home.
She may, there's a pointer on top of the platform in front of the TV.
If you can, Katrina, Ms. Freeman, actually, sorry. Could you point on the photograph to the various rooms that you recall and who they belong to?
That one was Sophia's room, and these two windows were Michael and Christine's room. And then that room was the front room.
And what about the room underneath Sophia's room?
The dining room or living room.
And does this photograph show where you stayed with Angel? And just going to show you what was marked as 41 exhibit. Could you tell me what we're looking at here?
That is the back of the house. So these two windows were in the kitchen. That's little Michael's room and the upstairs bathroom.
And what is on the side here?
The living room.
Okay. And showing you what was marked as Exhibit 36, what are we looking at there?
The back of the living room.
And Exhibit 37,
That is also the living room.
different angle?
Yes.
Okay. And 38,
Also the living room.
okay. And is this just a different angle?
Yes.
Is that,
And then over there is the dining room.
okay. And showing you what was marked as Exhibit 40.
That is also the dining room.
And the red door here, that's not the front door, correct?
Correct.
Would people, what area of the home, if you went in through that door, would it lead to?
The dining room.
Okay, and in terms of the number of doors downstairs in and around the dining room area, are there multiple ways to get in and outside?
Yes.
And if anybody were to smoke a cigarette typically, would they go out a particular door?
That side door.
The red door here in Exhibit 40?
Yes.
You could resume the scan. Thank you. And with regard to those doors, when you were living there for 4 years, were those doors typically kept unlocked? Unless everyone was leaving for the day?
During the day, they would be unlocked.
And what about, did anyone ever use like the sliding glass doors that we saw?
No.
Okay. And what was Michael Ricci like to live with?
At first, he was a bit intimidating. He was quiet, reserved. And as I got more comfortable being there and living there, he opened up a bit more.
Was he less intimidating?
Yes.
Do you know what he did for a living?
Yes.
What did he do?
He worked for Boston Fire Department.
And do you remember when this was?
And intent with acts. She was more likely to have committed the crimes charged in the indictments. You may proceed.
Thank you. At some point,
There was a lot of fighting, yelling, and just a lot of tension.
Michael Ricci, and he did for a living?
Yes.
Okay, I think I figured out what happened here. I think it jumped to the next stream. So just give me 1 minute to fix this. There is a cat on my chair as well. So I'm like sitting on the very edge of my seat. Okay, that is weird. Did they just...
Of the house, did it change after the affair? He
Okay. Wow. That was weird. That whole first part is gone. We're on a new stream that says started 3 hours ago. Let me show you what I'm seeing. This is what I'm seeing. This is the start.
He did for a living?
Yes.
What did he do?
He worked for Boston Fire Department.
Did we see that already? I don't remember that. Hi, Natalie Pirani. Pirani? Is that how I say it? Welcome, and I'm glad you're here. This is so sweet. Absolutely love it. But what I really am hoping to achieve is that the vibe stays the same, because I love the vibe of this chat. Like, that sounds very arrogant saying, but I'm not in the chat. Like, Okay, I'm going to stay here and just skip a little bit. She's talking about the house. So they show the house. I don't know. Something's weird here. We're going to have to just crack on from where we are.
He did for a living?
Yes,
What did he do?
he worked for Boston Fire Department.
Are you aware of any other jobs he did?
Yes,
And what was that?
MCC in Pembroke.
Is that a sprinkler system
Yes.
company? Okay. And in terms of Michael Ricci and living with him, could you describe your observations during the first 2 years you lived at that location? Observations of how he was with the defendant?
They were pretty close. Their relationship was good. They did a lot together, took a couple trips together.
And how was he with his children?
Good.
And what about the defendant? How was she with her children those first couple of years based on your observations?
She was good.
And how was she with Michael Ricci?
Also good.
And how often, when you were living there, would Michael Ricci be home versus at work, if you recall?
He worked a lot during the week, during the day, and then 2 days out of the week, he would be at work in Boston.
And when he came home from work, if you were...
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. I don't even know how they've done this on LNC, but they cut the whole Mistress part, the entire thing, which kind of puts me in a good spot because now I'm the only one who has it. But like, isn't that weird?
You were home and made observations, what would he typically be doing when he got home from work?
When he got home after working for 24 hours, he would usually be asleep. And other days, he would get home in the evening and sit in his chair in the living room and drink beer.
And when you were living there and things were good in the family, would you all do things together kind of as a family?
Sometimes, like sit in the living room and watch TV.
Would you describe it as a happy house during those first couple of years?
Yes.
At some point, did everything change?
Yes.
When was that?
October of 2018.
And can you describe how you remember when it all changed?
Yes, I had gotten a text from Christine asking me and Angel to go over to her friend's house, and that is where she had told us that Michael was having an affair.
And do you recall where you and Angel were when you got the text?
I was out. I was bringing Sophia to her friend's house, and Angel was at home, so I went back to pick him up.
And do you recall where Christine was or where she asked you to come to her?
Her friend's house in Pembroke.
Had you ever been there before?
No.
And upon your arrival, can you describe what happened?
We had walked in, and she was sitting on the couch. Her back was towards us, and she was smoking a cigarette and having a drink.
And when you say a drink, what kind of drink?
I'm not sure.
Was, do you know if it was alcoholic or alcohol or non-alcoholic, or do you not know?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And did the defendant seem different in any way to you upon your arrival there?
Yes.
How so?
Very upset.
Had you ever seen her smoking before?
No.
And can you describe what happened next when you got there?
She sat me and Angel down and told us about
And
the
what
affair.
did she, I'm sorry.
She told us about the affair when she sat us down.
What else did she say to you about the situation?
She told us that there was someone else and that he was leaving.
What, if anything, did she say about any change in your and Angel's role as a result of this?
She talked to us about how we were going to move forward and take care of the house and things like that.
And as far as you understood, was her plan to end things with Michael Ricci?
Yes.
Did that change after she initially told you that at her friend's house?
Yes.
How soon after?
A day or two, maybe 3.
What did she say?
She told us that Michael was going to stay.
Did she indicate how they were going to continue on together?
She just said that they were going to work on things.
And after she told you and Angel about the affair at her friend's house, how did life in the Ricci household change thereafter?
It was very different. There was a lot of fighting, and yelling, and just a lot of tension in the house.
Would you be present to witness these arguments?
Yes.
Would you always see them, or would you sometimes not see them, but you would
I
hear
wouldn't
them?
always see them, but I would hear them
How often would they argue?
nearly every day.
How long did that go on for?
Over 2 years.
At some point, had you kind of hit your breaking point in terms of how often the arguing was going on?
Yes.
And what did that prompt you to do?
I moved out
When did you move out?
of 2020.
1 month before Michael Ricci's death?
Yes.
And were the daily arguments, as you just described, happening up until the point you moved out?
Yes.
And with regard to those arguments, can you describe things you would hear in terms of their voices and then other objects around the house during the course of the argument?
Objection, Your Honor.
Rephrase the question.
What, if anything, can you describe the arguing that you heard?
A lot of yelling and crying.
By who?
Christine.
And what kinds of things would you hear her say?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
It was mostly, well, always about the affair.
Up until you left in December of 2020?
Yes.
And do you recall her any specifics of what she would be yelling?
No.
And what about Michael Ricci? What, if anything, would you hear when she would be yelling and crying?
He didn't remember.
And when you say he didn't remember what?
Any questions that she had about the affair.
So she was asking details about the affair?
Yes.
And he wouldn't remember, or he wouldn't remember.
Objection as to the characterization by the prosecutor of what the testimony just was.
I could ask a different question.
Thank you.
What kinds of things would she be asking him that he couldn't remember?
Details about how it happened and what happened.
And what, if anything, would she demand?
She wanted answers.
And what would Christine Ricci's tone of voice be like?
She was yelling and crying.
And where would the kids, as we call them, Angel, Michael Jr., and Sophia be when they would be fighting?
Your Honor, more
arose.
foundation is necessary for this question, I think.
If
It's a
you know.
two-year period.
Establish the foundation of,
Sure.
through the witness.
Of course. Ma'am, would, do you recall if during these daily arguments, if anybody else would be home
Yes.
and who would be home?
Angel, Michael, and Sophia and me.
And typically, if you know, would they be in the same room as the argument?
No.
And would you hear Christine Ricci and Michael Ricci argue about anything else besides the affair?
No.
What, if any, injuries did you ever see as a result of the fighting on Christine Ricci?
She had
Objection, Your Honor.
Let's see at the side of the bench. Case. Counters, anticipate. A limiting instruction, again, on prior bad acts, as I anticipate. I anticipate you're about to hear evidence concerning certain encounters alleged to have occurred between the defendant and the decedent, Michael Ricci, before the incidents which are the subject of the crimes in this case. This evidence is introduced to show the nature of the relationship between the defendant and the complaining witness, and the decedent, and insofar as it might bear on issues of possible motive and the defendant's intent in this case. Like all evidence, it's up to you to decide whether you believe it or you do not, and to decide what weight you should give this evidence. This evidence is not introduced, however, to show that the defendant had a bad character or propensity for violence. You may not consider the evidence for those purposes. The defendant is not charged with committing any crimes with respect to the decedent, other than the charges contained in the indictments in this case. You may not consider such conduct as a substitution for proof that the defendant committed the crimes charged, nor may you consider it as proof that the defendant has a criminal propensity or a bad character. You may consider this evidence solely on the limited issues of the defendant's state of mind, motive, and intent with respect to the indictments in this case. You may not consider this evidence for any other purpose. Specifically, you may not use it to conclude that if the defendant committed these other acts, she was more likely to have committed the crimes charged in the indictments. You may proceed.
Thank you. With regard to any injuries, let me start by asking, did you ever see the defendant injured following an argument?
yes.
And do you remember when this was?
The end of 2018.
And describe what happened.
I was told that there was an argument and she had punched him in the face.
Who told you that?
Christine.
Had you been hearing them argue prior to her making those statements?
Yes.
Where were they arguing?
Outside.
Outside the home?
Yes.
And then was it over the affair?
Yes.
Where were you?
In the basement.
Were you able to hear their volume from being inside?
Before they had gone outside.
So did the argument begin inside and then work its way outside?
Yes.
And was that common
Yes.
that they would take the fight outside?
Yes.
And do you know why that was?
So we wouldn't hear.
And on this particular occasion, which you believe to be the end of 2018, once they moved outside and continued arguing, whose voice did you hear?
Before she answers that, Your Honor, I would move to strike the answer with regard to their reasons for taking it outside.
Right. As the question was asked, I will strike that with regard to what the intent was when they took it outside. That testimony is stricken from the record.
And on this particular occasion, at some point, did you have a conversation with Christine at the conclusion of the argument?
Yes.
Where did that take place?
I don't remember.
Was it the same day?
No.
And was it soon after?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did she say to you?
She told me what happened and that she had gone to the hospital after.
What did she tell you had happened?
That there was an argument and she punched him in the face.
Who?
Christine punched
She-
Michael.
She punched who?
Michael.
Did you see his face after that argument?
Yes.
What, if any, injuries did you observe?
He had a bruise.
And during the course of following the defendant telling you about the affair and that they were going to try to work on things, what was the general mood like in the house thereafter?
It was very depressing.
And what, if any, changes did you see in the defendant in terms of housekeeping?
Objection, Your Honor.
Basis?
I think it's irrelevant.
May we be heard at
Frankly-
sidebar?
I'll see you at the side of the bench.
I think you had just testified that the general mood in the house during the last 2 years you were living there was depressing. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what, if any, changes did you see in Christine Ricci in terms of what she used to do around the house versus those last 2 years?
There wasn't much cleaning or anything going on in the house.
And was that different? The state of the house and the cleanliness of the house, did it change after the affair was revealed?
Yes.
And during this time period, did you, although you lived in the basement with Angel, did you have free reign over the house and kind of look at different rooms at different times?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, please?
You may.
Ma'am, I'm just going to ask you to take a look at a photograph. Tell me if you recognize it.
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
The kitchen.
And is that a fair and accurate depiction of, let me ask you this, the last time you were in the Ricci home, was that when you left in December of 2020? Or
Yes.
had you been back there thereafter?
I didn't go back.
So is that a fair and accurate depiction of how you remembered that area looking?
Yes.
I'd ask that this be marked as the next exhibit, please.
Any
Nope.
further objection?
The same one.
All right. It'll be marked as Exhibit 42.
And I'm just showing you another photograph. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
The kitchen.
And is this just a little bit of a different angle than the last photograph?
Yes.
And is this a fair and accurate depiction of how it appeared, that area, when you last were there in December of 2020?
Yes.
I'd ask that this be marked as the next exhibit.
Same objection?
Yes.
It'll be marked in a minute as Exhibit 43.
And Had you ever been inside the marital bedroom,
Yes,
the master bedroom?
yes.
And did you, let me ask you this, what was Michael Ricci's living conditions like in his bedroom?
Objection as to the characterization. If she has pictures, I think they speak for themselves.
May I approach the
Great.
witness?
Yep.
Ask you to take a look at two photographs. The first one, if you could tell me if you recognize that.
Yes.
What do you recognize this photograph to be?
Michael's side of the room.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of how it appeared when you were last there in December of 2020?
Yes.
I'd ask that this be marked as the next exhibit.
Same objection.
Yes.
Exhibit 44 is marked and admitted into evidence. Is it one or two?
It's one photograph, and now I'm going to show her the next one. With regard to this next photograph, can you take a look at it and tell me if you if you could recognize that?
The rest of the bedroom.
And whose side of the bedroom is that?
Christine's.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of how it appeared when you were last there?
No.
It's not. How did it look when you were last there?
Cleaner.
And is that her side of the bedroom?
Yes.
I'd ask that this be marked as the next exhibit.
Objection.
I'll see you at the side of the bench.
Photograph.
Yes.
With your Honor's permission, may I publish these photographs that were marked?
Exhibits 42 to 44?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Ma'am, just for the jury's purpose, I'm showing you exhibit 42. And this is in terms of, just so we have some idea, what area of the home is this?
The kitchen.
And in relation to the dining room, where is this room?
Can you ask that again?
Yes, where is this kitchen area in relationship to the rest of the home?
Up the stairs from the living room, dining room.
And with your Honor's permission, could she get off the stand and show us with the pointer where that area is she's referring to?
Yes.
Thank you.
If you came in through like over here, that's where the living room was and those steps.
So if I'm looking at the photograph, would I be kind of in the living room area?
No,
Where is the living room?
behind, if you were standing there.
Behind me?
Yes,
And what room would I be in?
the kitchen.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to show you now exhibit 43. This is just a different angle than the last photograph, correct?
Yes.
And could you tell us, is there, may I approach?
You may.
What are we looking at? This area right here where there's kind of an arch
The front room or another living room.
and the other angle of the photograph that we were looking at is the kitchen area would be where I'm making a circle a few feet in front of the photograph.
Yes.
And then the steps down, where is that in relation to where we're looking?
If you were standing there, it'd be behind you.
And the steps down lead to where?
The living room.
Okay.
Dining room.
Thank you. And with regard to exhibit 44, you had indicated that was Michael Ricci's side of the room, is that correct?
Yes.
Madam Prosecutor, I think we're going to take our break this morning. I'll stick it to a 15-minute break. We'll be back on for another hour of evidence at right at noon, or a little bit right after noon.
Adjourned to station no books on the agenda. Exit this way.
Step down.
Just seeing if they say anything. Because we need to catch up so that if anything disappears, we don't lose it. Looks like they didn't carry on the conversation. Bit of movement there. No, no. No, 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 no. They still aren't back. Gosh. Hey, JL. Local. So you're in this area? Oh. I didn't realize the cat had moved. And now there's one just here. By me bums. So I can't show you that one. Gosh. Feels like they were on break for a long time. 20 minutes. It was supposed to be a half an hour break. And their lunch is in 43 minutes. I'm so uncomfortable the way I'm sitting. I need to somehow show you guys this. You can't see that low down. Okay, hang tight.
Court now in session, please be seated.
Your Honor, we are returning to the matter of Commonwealth versus Christine Ricci. All parties are present in the courtroom.
May we briefly approach? Yes, thank you.
Okay, we're now back to live. I am going to have to give us about a 30-second buffer to get the closed captions, though. Maybe I should do that now. Okay.
Court now in session, please be seated.
Your Honor, we are returning to the matter of Commonwealth versus Christine Ricci. All parties are present in the courtroom.
May we briefly approach? Yes, thank you.
Natalie says, I haven't watched too much of this, not enough to know which way I lean. What's everyone's thoughts? In my opinion, I think I'm torn on what happened on that day. So what she alleges is that he fell into the knife. I don't know if I'm with her on that. I'm unsure on what happened in the kitchen in that moment. And I'm confused about them lying about, like, telling paramedics that it was a medical emergency, not that he was stabbed. Don't like that so much. Something's weird there. I do think that his addiction issues were massively downplayed by his friends and colleagues. I think that the reality of the home situation was completely different to what outsiders thought it was. I suspect that after years and years and years of there being problems in the house to do with the drinking and the arguing and the alleged memory lapses that he was having that nobody in his work life knew about, like all of that, something's weird there. But I think that she had reached the end of her tether, and that's kind of where it stops for me. I don't know. Did she snap? Was it an accident? Was he instigating? I definitely get the feeling that the children felt like he was constantly the one creating the kind of discourse in the house. That's what I understood from them. The daughter more reluctant, but Angel, I think, had had enough of Michael's antics. I think he also had very little support in his sobriety from the people close to him besides Christine. I mean, she went all in. She was going to Al-Anon. She was trying to understand the psychology. She was supporting him in his sobriety while other people in his life were kind of like, I preferred you when you were drinking. He had a lot of fair weather friends. But I can't draw a conclusion of that day, and that technically would make me not guilty, but it also doesn't. I want to see the family's calmness with the defense attorney kind of made me think that they I don't want to say it was justified. I just think that there's so much more to the story that we may never know. But yeah, Lil Miss, I agree. I generally don't like to draw a conclusion until both sides have shown. At this point, from just the state's case that they will rest tomorrow, seemingly, I'm not guilty. I think that they haven't proven the malice behind it. Then again, like, we tend to like to skip jury the briefing. What do you call it? Jury instructions. We tend to like to skip that, but sometimes that's the part where you can see how they got to that. Well, we're very happy to have you in chat, and I'm sure it must be a weird one because from the looks of it, they're like very normal suburban family, living a very normal suburban life. Difficult. But this defense attorney is absolutely smashing it. I like him. He's doing well. He is advocating for his client in the way everybody deserves to be advocated for. I will say though, every single trial that I watch, I will always be going in not guilty. Because that's how it's supposed to be. Also, if you're new here, I'm in South Africa. We don't have juries. And that's for our own sake, not against our own. Also, I'm practically like giving my seat to my cat. ASMR moment. Okay, this sidebar is getting a bit long. It's making me anxious. I wonder if they're approaching that point where they're going to ask about the texts. Oh, I have to try not to sit on this cat's head. Okay, yes. Can I please just have my 3 centimeters of the chair? Ah, there we go. So now you can see there's my back. It was a mess. And the kids talk about like how Christine stopped cleaning, but like, did it ever come to mind that maybe other people could? I want to see if they've updated that live stream again. Oh, you can't even see her anymore. She's gone back. Come here. Come here. Be
Good water.
Yes, please.
We're less than a minute behind now. And that's just so we can have closed captions on.
Court or rise to re-entering. This court's now in session. Be seated, please.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Freeman, did you see any changes in Michael Ricci after the affair was disclosed?
Yes.
Could you describe what changes you saw in him?
He became a bit more talkative. He was sad, anxious, and stressed.
And what, if any, changes did you see in the defendant in terms of her kind of getting out and about?
She would still go out and do things, but it lessened over the years.
Could you describe further what you are talking about in terms of the time frame?
She would go out and do things in 2019, but then in 2020, when COVID hit, she stayed in the house a lot.
In all fairness, didn't most people?
Yes.
So was there anything unusually different about the way she was acting compared to other people in the house?
She eventually stayed in her room most of the time.
And was that leading up to the time that you left?
Yes.
And what, if any, changes did you see in Michael Ricci's drinking habits?
He stopped.
Do you recall when it was that he stopped in relationship to when you were told about the affair?
A couple months after.
Are you aware of any groups he began attending relating to his drinking?
Yes.
And what group was that?
AA.
And what, if any, observations did you make about how often he would go?
Multiple times a week.
And who, if anybody, would go with him to the AA meetings?
Christine.
As far as you observed, did she go to each meeting, to every meeting?
Objection based on the
Sustained.
foundation.
And what, if any, observations did you make relative to Michael Ricci's socializing?
He made a lot of friends in AA.
Were you familiar with his friends that were not AA related?
One of them,
Who was that?
Mark McDonald.
What, if any, changes did you see in the way or the amount of times that Michael Ricci hung out with friends like Mark McDonald after the affair was revealed?
He did not see his friends.
What's that?
He didn't see his friends.
And what, if any, observations did you make of Michael Ricci and his cell phone?
He got a new number eventually.
Do you know the circumstances of him getting a new number?
Because of the affair.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. The last
To strike.
answer is stricken.
And were you aware whether or not Michael Ricci, when you first moved into the house, was on social media?
Yes.
And would you see him posting things?
Not
Or-
much.
And what, if anything, did you observe as it related to his social media?
All of his social media was gone.
Did you know why?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
And did you ever observe Michael Ricci go out and socializing without Christine Ricci with him?
Not that I know of.
And with regard to the incident that you previously described, where the defendant told you she punched or hit Michael in the face, do you recall seeing an injury to her body?
Yes.
Other than that injury to her hand, I believe you described, did you ever see any other injuries on her person following arguments with Michael?
Yes.
What other injuries did you say?
I had seen cuts on her.
And what about Michael following arguments?
No.
Other than bruised face?
Yeah.
And drawing your attention to May 10th of 2020, do you recall that day?
Yes.
Do you recall what that day was?
Yes.
And what day was that?
It was Mother's Day.
And just getting back a moment to the cuts you saw on Christine Ricci.
Your Honor, note my objection to that last answer based on what we talked about before.
I note your objection.
Were those cuts on her hands?
No.
Were those cuts, do you know how the cuts came about?
She did it
Objection.
herself.
I'll let the answer stand.
She did it herself?
Yes.
Drawing your attention to Mother's Day, May 10th, 2020. I'm sorry, May 10th, 2020. You just, I believe, testified that that was Mother's Day. Is that right?
Yes.
And where were you that day?
I was at my sister's house,
Where was that?
Pembroke.
And were you with any of the Ricci family at your sister's house?
Angel.
And what were you doing at your sister's house
It was my nephew's birthday.
on Mother's Day?
Yes.
Is that traditionally Mother's Day a tough day for you?
Yes.
And could you explain why?
My mother passed away in
Objection, Your Honor.
2013.
All right. I'll strike the last answer. It's a tough day for her.
And what, if anything, were you doing at your sister's house with Angel? Was there food, drinking? What was going on?
There was food and drinking.
Did you do both?
Yes.
And at some point, did you and Angel leave your sister's house?
Yes.
And where did you go?
To our house in Marshfield.
And that's the Moraine Street address?
Yes.
And when you got there, who was there?
Christine and Michael. I'm not
Would
sure.
now
if
be a
Sophie
good time
was.
for the short instruction.
Yes.
Jurors, I'm going to give you an instruction again with regard to prior bad acts. You are about to hear testimony about certain acts allegedly committed by the defendant. As you know, the defendant is not charged with committing any crimes other than the charges contained in the two indictments. You may not take the defendant's prior acts as a substitute for proof that the defendant committed the crimes charged, nor may you consider them as proof that the defendant has a criminal personality or bad character. But you may consider the acts solely on the limited issues of motive, state of mind, intent, plan, or absence of mistake or accident on the part of the defendant. You may not consider this evidence for any other purpose. Specifically, you may not use it to conclude that if the defendant committed these acts, she must have also committed the offense for which she has been charged. It would be extremely unfair to consider this evidence for those purposes, particularly knowing that she's not been charged with anything else related to those acts. Moreover, those acts have no relevance whatever to the charges in this case. You may proceed.
Thank you. Upon your return with Angel to the house on Moraine Street, where did you go?
In the basement.
And were you with Angel the whole time when you got back, or did you separate when you first got back?
I'm not sure.
At some point, you indicated you went down to the basement, is that right?
Yes.
And what was in the basement?
I was packing a bag
To go where?
to my dad's.
And could you describe what happened upon your return to the home?
There was some sort of argument. I'm not sure who it was between. So I wanted to leave.
Is that why you went and packed?
Yes.
Okay. And when you say there was an argument, where was the argument?
Upstairs in the living room.
May I have one moment, please?
Yes.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Thank you. Ma'am, when you described, actually, let me show you this, showing you what was marked as Exhibit 7. Do you recognize that area of the home?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
The living room, dining room.
And is this the living room that you're referring to that the argument was happening in?
Yes.
I'm just going to show it to you on the large screen. It's Exhibit 7. So if you can tell us, what room are we looking at here?
Dining room.
And just for the record, I'm pointing to the lower left-hand corner of the photograph. And is it fair to say it goes right into the living room?
Yes.
And the only kind of delineation is by the material on the floor
Yes.
and the furniture, obviously. And where in relationship to this photograph did you see and hear the argument when you emerged from the basement?
I'm not sure.
Did you know it was the living room?
Yes.
Okay. So is it fair to say in this photograph, it was in the kind of center of the photograph?
Or more in front of the bathroom, kind of just standing around the coffee table.
Could I ask for the witness to show us on the actual big screen what area she's referring to, please?
She may.
So where's the bathroom?
Right here.
So you're pointing with the pointer to kind of the to the right of the brown box?
Yes.
Okay. And best of your recollection is that that's where in that general area the argument was happening?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And just to go back one moment, I'm going to just show you Exhibit 8. Earlier in your testimony, you were describing how the kitchen has steps down to an area, correct?
Yes.
Is that shown in this photograph, Exhibit 8?
Yes.
And those, I'm pointing to the stairs in the middle, are those the stairs that you're referring to?
Yes.
And that goes, that area goes into this area, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, I'm showing you Exhibit 6. Okay, thank you. You could resume the stand. Now, with regard to Mother's Day, May 10th, 2020, Can you explain when you got home, what door you came in through?
The side door.
And the side door was the one that you showed us, and the other red door without the wreath on it, is that right?
Yes.
And when you walked in, did you see the defendant and Michael Ricci?
Yes.
And what did you hear? Was there arguing going on?
I'm not sure if it was between the two of them.
Okay. Did you hear Christine speaking?
Yes.
And what was the tone of her voice?
Upset.
Did you hear anyone else speaking?
Angel.
What was the tone of his voice?
Upset.
What about Michael Ricci?
I'm not sure.
You have no clear memory of if he was speaking at all? Okay. And at some point, you made a decision to go downstairs to your and Angel's bedroom, is that right?
Yes.
And you indicated earlier you were packing a bag, correct?
Yes.
And then at some point, did you come back upstairs?
Yes.
Could you describe what you saw?
Christine was sitting on the kitchen floor with a knife.
And who, if anyone, was around her?
Michael and Angel.
And when you say Michael, is that Michael Sr.?
Yes.
Was Michael Jr. there?
No.
And what, if anything, were Michael Sr. and Angel doing as Christine was on the floor holding a knife?
They were trying to stop her.
And when you say trying to stop her without making any conclusory statements, trying to stop her from doing what?
Cut herself.
And at some point, were they successful in removing the knife from Christine's hand?
I'm not sure.
Okay. What did you do as this was happening?
I left.
Who'd you leave with?
My dad.
Your dad was not there, correct?
Correct.
So you left to go to your dad's?
He picked me up.
Okay. Had you seen where Christine Ricci had gotten that knife from?
No.
At the time that you left the home, what was going on in the home on that day?
I'm not sure.
Well, had things calmed down, or were they still kind of in the state that you just described where they were trying to actively get the knife away?
That was happening as soon as I had walked out, so I'm not sure what happened after.
Okay. So basically, generally the same time she was holding the knife, they were trying to get it away and you were leaving?
Yes.
Okay. And at some point, did you change your living situation after or sometime in 2020?
Yes.
And what month was that?
December.
And why did you move out?
I had ended the relationship with Angel and also because of all of the fighting.
Did you remain in contact with Christine Ricci?
No.
Did you remain in contact with any of the Ricci family after you moved out?
Yes.
Who?
Angel, Sophia, and little Michael.
And after you moved out, did you ever go back into the home?
Yes.
And what was that for?
To get the rest of my things.
And did you see Christine Ricci after you moved out in December 2020?
No.
And at some point, did you come to learn about the incident on January 28th, a
Yes.
month later?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'll see you at the side of the bench.
Okay, I'm going to pause this and end the stream. It's going to send you to my next stream. In the meantime, I'm going to set up that this records so that we can't lose anything. So I will see you on the other side of lunch. They're going to go for possibly 10 more minutes and then go to lunch. So don't worry. I'll make sure it doesn't lose it. I'll do my best anyway. And we'll pick up in about just over an hour. I'll see you there.